so much, Jan. Good evening, and thanks for showing up. I know stuff is dark, it's cold. And you probably had so many lectures today that you don't want to listen to another one. So I'll try to entertain you for a bit. But before I do that, I would like to thank the faculty, as well as the Brno Gallery of Architecture for inviting me, Jan especially, and Carolina, of course, who has been a former student at the University of Liechtenstein where I teach, and it's particularly nice to see Humphrey as well, who's come especially for this, also former student from our institution. Thanks for the kind introduction, Jan. I am indeed an architect and urban planner, but I'm also an utter failure when it comes to the profession, because I had my own office in London for a few years, and after 5 years I decided this is not for me, I can't do this, because I spent more time in court arguing with clients and other people, and this is why I ended up in academia and teaching. Why am I telling you this? Because it shows that you can study architecture, but you don't necessarily end up being an architect. And I think this is very much what my lecture is also about today. So what I'll show you today is essentially what I work on. It's about my work. I know it's very selfish coming in, but it's what I'm passionate about and what I love doing. I'm an educator, and I lead the Institute of Architecture and Planning at the University of Technology. We did publish this book. You called me a writer, an excellent writer or something, or an accomplished writer. I'm terrible at writing, so this is why I have other people helping me to write. But we published this, and this was a fantastic project to be part of, because architecture education is usually fascinating and is very under-researched. And I'm very honored to be part of this series. I'm just curious, have you seen the other speakers that were before me in this series? Like Michelle Howard, or Tatjana Schneider, Bart Lotsma? Yeah, some of them? Okay.
I have seen them.
Okay, I can imagine. So they are super accomplished people in this field, and we've actually been collaborating on many projects together already. So it's nice to be part of this series. So let's start. New schools of thought. I'm not going to bore you with definitions, but it took us a long time as a project team to come up with one, and we decided it should be a set of ideas and new approaches on methods of knowledge creation and on forms of knowledge transfer that a group of people dedicated to architectural design and spatial planning share about architecture education. If I ask you to repeat it, you can't, because it's too complex. But what I want you to take away from it is that it's about a group of people sharing an ideology, sharing similar ambitions. So what I'll show you today is a little bit about this research project, the tendencies that we have identified, the process and the findings, and then I'll show you how this also is possibly being translated into architectural practice. By that I mean into an architectural school, and that is ours. We experiment on ourselves. But first, why did we do this? Why did we start looking into new forms of architecture education? It probably came out of a huge frustration, out of my study time, as well as in the current system. We're, by the way, partner schools. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. But we have a lot of exchange between our two schools. And we have, therefore, the ability to credit you with ECTS from our school to your school, right? Very simple. Now, if you think about it, what that means, it means comparability, right? It means that the two schools are to some extent comparable. The lectures that you do here are credited there, and the other way around. In my experience, sometimes students only go to lectures if they get credits for it, right? You chase the credits and you probably choose your weekly schedule according to whether you're free on that afternoon or whether you have to watch some TV or play some football instead. So instead of actually following your pure interests, it's not you, so everybody else is not here, you sometimes just look after the schedule. And this was such a frustration that I felt like some things needed to change. I'll start with this. You probably know who they are. There are 4 architects, and there are 4 architects on the cover of Time magazine, American, important American magazine. And what's interesting here is that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were a lot of different architects on the cover of Time magazine. And after that, there was only 2. This is Philip Johnson in 1979 and Daniel Libeskind in 2005. No more architects ever since. Now this is supposed to be the important people. These are the people that shape our society and are the power players of this world. Well, how come since 1979 there's only been 2 architects? Well, Raym Koolhaas argues that it has to do with the fact that architects are no longer visionaries. They have lost some degree of power and influence on society. They've basically become service providers to people in real estate. And I would agree to some extent with it. Now, I introduced this lecture saying I'm interested to see what architects can also become. And I'm sure Tatjana Schneider spoke about this, about agency and the need to become more proactive again in the way we act as architects. And so we looked at 2 different things. One is practice and one academia. And I already told you about Bologna and the Bologna system that was introduced in 1999, so it's 20 years ago. And it comes with the need to establish mobility and connectivity between European states. I think that's worked really well. It's really fantastic. It probably needs to be rethought at this point with regards to mobility, but it certainly brought us closer together. Otherwise, we wouldn't be partner schools. So we started 4 years ago by doing this, asking a question: well, has Bologna led to homogenization in architecture education? Is your school and my school doing the same thing? What is possible within this framework of Bologna? And so we went on to do this. Not alone, we had a lot of partners. So the Architecture Association was involved. The school in Prague, mainly through one person who is now in Estonia. The Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, Michel Howard was here as well. And the University of Antwerp, I believe you have Johan de Walsche coming also as part of the series. He's a very dear friend and the co-author of quite a few texts in this book. He'll be fantastic to listen to. So we've been looking at expanding the fields of architectural education, meaning what else can we incorporate, what can we learn from, what does it lead to when we study a different type of architecture, what tendencies do we have, and what environments do we work in. I've just listed, to make it a bit shorter, the 5 key tendencies that we have discovered doing a huge survey among architecture schools. Lots of them complain about the gap between architectural academia and practice, as well as the mismatch between financial support and public awareness. I'm sure some colleagues of yours who have graduated and started in offices, they realized actually what I learned is only half of what I need to know when I come out, because practice is actually quite different to studying. At the same time, the financial support and public awareness. Everybody is talking about maybe climate now or medicine, and this is where the funds go. Nobody's talking about urban planning or architecture, so we're generally underfunded. A lack of common architectural language. I know language is a difficult term, but I mean like ways of speaking about architecture that people can actually understand. You're probably happy to talk to each other, but the moment you try to explain your individual projects to your grandmother, she's going like, what are you talking about? So I think there's a mismatch there as well to address the wider public. Architecture's physical presence appears to be repressed by augmented scientification and digitalization. The imagery that is now being produced, the ways we communicate, has somewhat detached from the physical aspects of architecture. I think this is a problem for many schools. And of course, the context of scientification. You are a technical university, you have chemistry and physics, and I'm sure, I mean, at your level, you have discussions about funding for this department or that, and the rector of the uni will understand that it's necessary to produce biochemistry Nobel Prize winners and not necessarily architects. And this leads to questions about methodologies and work in research. And then finally, the increasing commercialization and the competitiveness. So we all vie for you guys, for good students. We need to make it attractive for you guys, and that comes at a price. I mentioned a survey. We've done a big survey among schools, and then we also started to talk about it quite publicly. This was an event at the Architecture Biennale, where we debated with people who have also contributed. This is Johan, by the way. And this is Harriet Harris. She's just become the Dean of Pratt Institute, so it was very helpful to talk to them about certain tendencies. This is Odile Deck in black, as you can see. We'll come back to her in a minute. This was really important in establishing also this newspaper, which I'm happy to leave here for those, which was the first output of this research. What we realized quite quickly is that in this survey, and this you can't really see what this is, but it talks about the different case studies that we have conducted. It became very clear that it's not helpful to just look at architectural schools like yours and ours in tertiary education, where you do bachelor's, master's, and PhDs. To actually think of something entirely new, you need to also look elsewhere. And we've come up with 4 different categories. One is the one that we are in, the higher education, and we chose a few interesting schools and projects, live projects you probably remember from Tatiana Schneider, and so forth. We eventually decided on Confluence in France. That's the new school founded by Odile Deck. We'll come back to it. Secondary education, very interesting. So younger people, kids and juveniles, and we looked at the school in Austria. Research, a research network called Interchain in Europe, and something between public mediation and research, which is the EDIS network campus in Berlin, which you might know from the EDIS gallery. So we conducted a lot of interviews with those people from these case studies, and I think a few very striking elements came from it. One being then that, of course, architecture is more about just creating space, houses and cities. It's a holistic practice addressing all aspects of life and society, and that means that it needs to be considered in the education. If you think about it, you're a technical university, so I'm sure you have lots of maths and structures and construction, right? I grew up in a more sort of how do you call it? Schools that relate to territory and humanities. So I didn't have much of the technical aspects. So again, you already start to choose a certain path, whereas we should actually look at it much more holistically. Of course, it's about the quality of people's lives. We want to improve people's lives. We want to improve conditions. I think otherwise you wouldn't be studying architecture, you'd be in finance somewhat. Because we want to make our environment better, right? So it's for the many and not the few. And of course, it's about addressing the public, and this is the Public School of Architecture in Brussels, and their credo is that the school's mission is to create a new public for an architecture while opening up an architecture for the public. And this was very striking for us because it felt like, well, actually, they're addressing other people than just people like us. They're going out there and they talk to people on the street and try to engage them in architecture. And then this is what Tatiana's probably been talking about, these live projects that they did in Sheffield, which really helped to engage with the public by physically building and engaging with the community. This is a quote by Odile Deck, and this was very important for me. The way our students, you, will build their architectural life will not be the same as ours. Totally changed my perspective on teaching, because I was also brought up with an Italian professor in front reading his script. I'm quite sure it's probably not so much done here anymore. But there was this idea of the master class, at least, where you have the grand, often male architect telling you what is good architecture and how to do it. And while I never subscribed to it, this was definitely the end of it, because I feel like you guys can teach us more teachers than probably we can do. It's not about teaching, it's about coaching, it's about guiding you in a certain way, in a certain direction. And of course, what's also really important, and one of the key findings, is that the spaces that we do this in are absolutely crucial in developing a certain value system in our heads. So for me, rooms like these should be abolished. You should take it all out, because I should never stand here on the podium projecting behind me and you all facing me. That's not the way to really go about it. So I'll break it down into a few more points. In the 4 case studies that we looked at, and this is the school for young people in Austria. It's a temporary building built by students as well of the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Innsbruck. And well, I guess the pictures are not so great, but it's the ultimate freedom in this building. So kids can come, afternoons, days, they can spend time there. They can take the paint from the shelves, they can start painting. They can move around the building, they can inhabit it in whichever way they want. So the ultimate freedom is basically at the core of this project, which I felt was really refreshing, because in the way we kind of use these buildings, like here you do the lecture, then you have your ateliers or drawing spaces or whatever, and then you probably go home and work on your computers as well. So this was nice. This is Odile Dec's school. Does everybody know Odile Dec? She's this crazy looking French architect, Goss. And she had enough of the French system, which is very centrist, as most of the things in France. And she opened this new school, which is called Confluence in Lyon. And she was given this industrial space. Now, she has no money. She put her own cash into it. And as a means to survive, she started to rent out spaces above where the students work and where the exhibition space is. And she rented it out to startup companies who then started to engage with the work the students were doing. Students were starting to work for the startup companies. So it was all of a sudden a really nice kind of mixture of people who ended up doing really interesting stuff. And it wasn't necessarily, here is academia, here is practice, but they actually were really helping each other out. The third case study was this research consortium that I was talking about, called Interchain. It's already 15 years old, and they started really early by bringing together industry with academia and connecting via a virtual platform. So it was all about bringing people together in the right space, symbiotic relationships, helping each other out in this level as well. Research-based work. So there's Foster's involved, various universities are involved, companies are involved, and that makes it very exciting. And the last one is this campus, ADIS campus in Berlin that I was talking about. Their ambition is to really bring architecture to a public, to a wider public. They do a lot of events, exhibitions, they also do workshops, and it's a different format, and they attract obviously a different kind of clientele. It's not students, it's people who actually actively want to engage in architecture. So the 4 break down to 4 points. The embodying of a mindset, and this is what I was talking about, the freedom of the first school. Educating for autonomy, thinking entrepreneurially. And that's not just about renting out spaces, also enabling students to take responsibility and be active part of the running of the school. Using strategic partnerships, this is sort of networking, and finally the cultivating of public discourse. So translating this into practice is very difficult, right? Because now you might have a picture of, wow, this is amazing. You know, if you put all these puzzle pieces together, it sounds like a really, really nice school. But of course, it's not so easily done, because if you want to turn it into a school and all these ideas, you end up with a lot of stumbling blocks. For example, you still have the Bologna guidelines. You have the EU directives. This might sound very boring to you, but this is what Jan and I have to deal with on a daily basis. You have laws in your individual countries. You have frameworks that are given by a university, and all of a sudden your wonderful castle that you built in your mind sort of starts to break down. You also need to do validation. We need to do this by law. So we had to get validated. And you can either, we did this with the Royal Institute of British Architects, and this is the sort of only promotional bit in there. We're very proud that we've achieved this validation. It's the first school that has done it for all 3 programs, bachelor, master and PhD. That's not why I'm showing it. It's about engaging in a discourse even with bodies like these, who assess your quality, to convince them that what you're doing is actually improving the quality of the work of the students. And this is a lengthy process. And again, you need to engage with people on different levels that you usually never deal with before. What's really nice is that what they said in their commendations, and I'll be very short on this, reflects a little bit on those points that I highlighted in the research project. So, for example, they really appreciate that the significant commitment the university makes to the quality of the students' experience by providing an intimately scale. I think there's a question of scale as well. Open and informal learning environment. So this is the embodiment of a mindset that I was talking about. The proposed adoption of a project-based approach. I'll talk about this in a minute. The architecturally specific pedagogy, this is also really important. I'm sure Johan will talk about it in this lecture. We have also a 3-point model that I'll come to in a minute. And finally, using the campus as a student laboratory was also a key aspect of their appreciation. So, can you design our school with this? And we have totally revamped our school. And again, this is really important. It's not about advertising and saying how great we are. There's lots of flaws in this as well. But I think it's important to try and to see what else comes from it. And only time will tell whether it will work or not. So what we've done is we really follow the bottom-up process. We've involved everybody at the faculty, and I mean everybody, including all the students. I think this is crucial to design a school of thought. Means bringing people together, means bringing all the opinions of people together, and having a democratic process to design both content and ways of thinking. So what you see on the left is the content-based mind map, in a way. What is larger is the themes that the school has outlined as being important to them. And here's how we intend to do it. And of course, bringing the two together is never easy, but it kind of seems to work. This, you have to imagine this as kind of a turning table. In the middle is the institute, and you can turn the blue and the orange bit as you want it to create projects. But what is more important is this cycle here. What we thought was really important, and again, you have to think back of the direct engagement with the public, is to actually move away from pure paper projects. So architecture education in general is producing a lot of good ideas. You've done however many semesters, 5, 6, 7, I don't know, and you have as many projects somewhere in a drawer that have never seen the light of day again. And I think this is a waste of time in a way, and a waste of energy. If you would imagine putting all of the forces together that you have in one semester at your school and actually do something with it that is of value to the public for real, you could do something quite amazing. And this is why this chain is really important. So of course you need to consider what is around you. You need to conceive an idea. You need to configure it. This is when you start to design as architects. And finally, and this is the most important, you need to construct it. And I don't mean constructing it as a building necessarily. You can also be constructing it as a book or constructing it as a film, but something that has an impact beyond these 4 walls that we're in. So a school, in our opinion, should be a place for personal development. It should be a place of encounter for critical and creative thinking and working. What we would like architects to be is independent architect entrepreneurs who by their own initiative help design a sustainable future. And we would like to enable students to perceive challenges, formulate their own briefs, initiate and implement their own projects. People who graduate should be capable to lead and take responsibility in society, politics, economy, science and culture, so way beyond the mere designing of architecture and cities. And the curricula's content should reflect the challenges of the region, which makes it a very context-based environment that works as a laboratory for global issues. This is really important. I mentioned pedagogy early on. We have this amazing pedagogy, actually, which is the project-based learning. You all have a project, you sit together with your tutors and professors, and you have a one-to-one talk with them. This only exists in architecture. I haven't really found any other field, maybe you know, where this has become the norm and the practice. And this is extraordinary because it's really tailor-made to the students. But what it also does, in a way, and this is where I become critical, is that it detaches from the theory. So probably this morning you had a lecture here, Professor XY, teaching you about modernism, Bauhaus. And then you go back and you do your urban design somewhere in the studio. And you often think like, well, actually, how do those two now come together? You always find a way, but it's not really direct, is it? Or you have something on construction, and yet you don't have anything about construction in your design studio, so that makes it sometimes really awkward. And then you come out of your studies and you kind of have all these pieces, you have all these credits somehow in your head as well, all these themes, but you can't really bring them together. So from a really fragmented curriculum, we've kind of really boiled it down to massive modules, really large modules that are just designed. So that the teaching takes place primarily in project-based studios, not by a single professor or tutor, but by interdisciplinary teams. And there's no more distinction between theory and design, because they're all tailor-made for the project, all come together in that. It's a huge problem, I can tell you as well, because it means every project you have to redesign the whole curriculum for this particular project, which is a huge effort, but I think it's worth it. And then, of course, we want to bring it to this end product, which is constructing. Second element that I find really important is that architectural studies should not be sequential. Some things you have to do sequentially, chronologically maybe, because they build upon each other. But I think you're all smart enough to choose your own ways. You have your own interests. You have somebody's maybe more interested in construction, somebody else is more interested in urban design, and you have to be able to navigate your way through. So what we're trying to do is to develop a learning landscape that you can sort of pick and choose your own topics very freely, which ends up then in a series of projects, portfolios, that you can take with you, hopefully build it. I already mentioned this personal mentoring, which is a real strength of architecture education, and I think this is something that we need to nurture much more. So I think this one-to-one, talking about where you want to take your career, where your interests are, is something that is really important. We also felt that a lot of times you don't have space to think, because you're so into this rhythm of having to produce. You know, there's this class you need to do this paper for, and there's this project, and next week the prof wants to see you again, so you're constantly kind of just ticking boxes. And there's not enough space to actually think about it. I think this is also really important. And what's, for me, and this is why I introduce myself not necessarily as a teacher, but as an educator, is I feel like you can teach each other a lot too. And if you take responsibility, there's way more from you guys to come than from the teachers or the professors. A final aspect that I find absolutely crucial is that we're in a very privileged position, being able to study, being able to work in academia. I think not many people have that freedom. And both our institutions are state-funded institutions. That means the taxes that you pay kind of reinvest in yourself by studying here again. But I think we give very little back. It's a very enclosed system. And by introducing service learning, or what we call pro bono projects, so for the good of the public, this is an essential element to not only give something back to society, but also get students to become much more aware and actually implement and start their own projects. They go through the city, through the world, and they discover something, hey, here's something not quite right. And quite often we walk past it. We don't do anything about it. And we felt like this module maybe gives them the opportunity to say, like, hold on a minute, you know, there's a problem. Somebody with a wheelchair can't go here and there. Maybe we can do something about it. And as part of their studies, they can. And they will, because they now see the problems, they develop a project, they find the financing and everything for it, and they do it. So it's self-initiated, and it creates, obviously, new networks by connecting to political bodies. And you probably can't wait to do your final diploma, right? Why? Because you want to get out of here, because you want to earn money, because you want to be an architect. The question is, what kind of architect do you want to be? Do you want to go straight into an office? Do you want to set up on your own? I'm not quite sure what the legal situation is in the Czech Republic. You probably need to work for a while before you can sign, but 3 years. 3 years. 3 years, okay. In Switzerland, the title architect is not protected, so everybody can be an architect, so it doesn't really matter. In Liechtenstein, there's 2 years as well. So there is these chambers, of course, that you need to be looking out for. But we felt like, hey, you know what? Maybe your ambition is eventually to become your own your own boss. I think this is also part of the ambition why I studied architecture, because I don't necessarily want to work for somebody else. I want to be my own boss. And I hope you have that ambition. Not much nodding, but okay, somewhere in there it's in you. So we think we can help you in doing that. And I think the schools should do more to do that. And we've come up with this startup project, or whatever you want to call it. It's a year-long project at the end of your studies, which basically enables you to ideally set up your own practice with your first project. So it's what we talked about before, it's small, with sort of wheelchair access and whatever. It's about developing a first project and get it off the ground. Whether that's possible or not, I'll tell you in a few years' time, but it's at least the ambition to get people straight into practice. Of course, you can't sign the papers, because you need to be an architect for 3 years. But you can enter interesting partnerships. You can team up with other people who can. This I'm not going to talk about, because it's interesting. Okay, the final aspect of my lecture is about making architecture public. I spoke in the beginning about the necessity to engage a wider audience, to make people more aware about what architecture and urban planning is, in order to get more acceptance, but also eventually more funding and more respect and more power, hopefully. And by power, I don't mean like political power, but means to actually change the world in the way we want to change it. So the way we work is pretty much like that. This is these are student projects. These are 1 to 5 models of a tower that is going to be built. And we're doing this together with the mayor of the town, the forest department who provide the wood, carpenters, local carpenters. And this is just the exhibition of these towers, and now the council is choosing one, and we're going to build it. And this is, for everybody involved, a really interesting exercise. Of course, for the students to get this sort of public audience, and also having to deal with mayors in the way they kind of design this and develop it. For the mayor to have a viewing tower of that kind, we can argue whether we need a viewing tower or not, but for the public, of course, to appreciate then the view from this tower. It's going to be 35 meters tall. Oh, here's another project. The students were complaining, this was about 5 years ago, I'm not sure, Hanke, you were there when this was built, or no, yet. Were complaining that our model workshop is too small, whether we could do something about it. I said, like, well, we don't have the funds, so, you know, how much we can do. So they said, okay, then we do something about it. And they started this project. And they said, like, we're going to build one. And of course, we helped them in doing it in the end. But again, with the help of the local communities and the industries, they started to develop prototypes, started to build it by themselves, partially in their study time, partially in their free time, whatever the weather. And they started to really construct it on site. We provided them with a site. And eventually it went. I know it looks a bit like a church, but it's a model workshop. And in the end, these are the two teachers that were, of course, helping them out. We opened it, and we now have a new, or rather brand new model workshop. This is our uni. It's an old factory building, and this is the model workshop. That's it. So they wanted it. They came up with the idea. They came up with the design. They built it. We were not teaching them how to do it. They figured it out themselves. We just supported them doing it. Or another project. This is, by the way, it's the setting we're in now. We're in the middle of the Alps, quite steep. This is the Rhine that emerges from probably somewhere up there and then goes all the way to Rotterdam. And here we had a problem with this little village, and the house was destroyed and needed to be rebuilt. And again, the students said, like, hey, come on, we can do that, you know. Let's move in, we help you out. And they again redesigned it according to the constructive standards that are needed, and did it. Another small project, a little hut for cross-country skiers. They needed a warm space and a place to kind of fix their skis. And again, a student who was involved in cross-country skiing said, can we do something? Is this a project that the uni would support? Of course, yes, let's do it. We can't do it at the uni, so we don't have the space. We're a very small school. You have to imagine that we're 180 students all in all, so it's tiny, and we totally rely on the local industries and the local craftsmen to help us out. This is Martin Rau, who works in compressed mud buildings. Here's a foundry where we can pour. So this is all in the vicinities, and this is what I mean with this network. That is totally important to address. Another level of making it public is that I think it's our obligation as universities to address the next generation. I think these are the people the kids are the people that will be the next architects. Besides you, of course, but that's the next generation. I recently had a student. I've already been in my job for over 10 years, and I had a student who came to the uni at what we call the Kids University, which is like an event once a year where kids can come and experience architecture. And she did it 10 years ago, and she now came 19 years old back as a student, which is kind of a nice story. So we do work a lot with school children, and that's beside anything that we do in education. So this is totally on top of it. So we do these workshops. And kids are fantastic because they're just total free thinkers, and they carry the message back to their parents, who then carry the message back to their grandparents. They're extraordinary multipliers. And we do all sorts of different projects with them, exhibitions, even at the local art museum and so forth. And we've produced this is in German, but this is basically a guide for secondary schools, like primary and secondary schools, of how to integrate architecture into their curriculum with like different exercises and different playful elements to kind of get them more engaged into this. Of course, we also do expert mediation of architecture. This was at the Biennale that we did. That's probably not so interesting. I think everybody's doing that. And that brings me to the final project, and this is a very recent one. What you see here is a shipping container. We used it for a research project. Thermal glass that could absorb heat and keep out the cold. And that research project was finished, and we ended up with this container. We didn't know what to do with it. So we upcycled it. We kind of worked on it and transformed it and built this platform around it, with the ambition to just create another space. primarily for the students. The student union wanted to use it. But it became so popular that communities came to us and asked us, hey, can we use it? Can you do something about it? And now it's become this ambassador for us that travels through the entire region, not just promoting architecture, but engaging the public in a much broader sense. This is Liechtenstein's capital. Liechtenstein's capital is called Vaduz, and it's got 6,000 inhabitants, just to give you an idea, right? So we know pretty much everybody. This is the castle where the Duke lives in. This is the National Football Stadium. 6,000 people fit in there. So the entire population of the town, basically. But to give you an idea, no? So what you see here is that we call it the base camp. This is a parking lot that has been there since the 70s. They were very proud of it when they built it, because in the 70s it was all car-centered and very important to have a central car parking space. And now it's become this derelict space. This is Parliament building, government is just here. This is the famous art museum, the Christian Cares. So they said, like, hey, can you do something about it? Can you activate it? What can you do? And we said, well, let's just drop the base camp in and let's do a public program with it. So that's all it takes to activate the space. That's all it takes to then all of a sudden bring people together, not knowing about what architecture is or urban planning, but starting to talk about architecture and urban planning all of a sudden, because they're in the middle of the town on a public parking lot that all of a sudden is something else. So council meetings started to take place, negotiations and discussions took place. People just came for the drink and the coffee, and it was a really fantastic environment. This is the unfolded container with the extension. In a way, very simple, no? You just create a space where you can meet, and you start to talk to people. And you start to talk to people, what do you like about your town? What don't you like about the town? What is it lacking? What does it need? And all of a sudden people start to think about, well, maybe actually, yeah, we could do with this. Maybe I shouldn't take the car all the time. Maybe we need a park. Maybe we should do this and that. So this is also part of architectural mediation. It's about going to the people. The people do not come to the university. They do not come here. Even if you have an architectural gallery to do a high-profile exhibition, that's only for like-minded people. If you really want to affect people, you have to go to them. And you have to provide them with an environment that they feel comfortable in, where they can freely speak their mind, and see that something is happening as a result. So this stage or house or container or base camp has been traveling to all sorts of places. This is then, it went to like 5 or 6 different communities, and they keep on knocking on our door because they feel like, especially mayors and politicians feel like, hey, this is such an easy way to start to have a discourse about architecture and urban planning. And it's very easy for them because they don't have to do anything. It just happens automatically. And it's a really good testing ground, because politicians, you can't win votes with urban planning, because the process of having anything done in urban planning is too long, and the mandate for a politician is like 3-4 years, so nobody's going to talk about urban planning. But like this, they can really start the process and just test the waters so they like it. And nonsense. So, concluding thoughts. I don't think a new school of thought can be designed. But architecture education is an extraordinary field with a lot of powers and a lot of potential, because it can act as a catalyst for sustainable development of our built environment. Of course, this is what every teacher will tell you, this is what we want you to do. But it's not necessarily clear how. They just invest in you and thinking, well, you will be doing this later. But what I think it can do is bring academia and practice closer together, and I've shown you a few examples of how this might work. Maybe through the actual build projects that bring together from the forestry department to the local builders, to academia and research, a larger group of people. By engaging a wider audience. and thus broadening the discourse on building culture. Maybe again with the same mechanism. Think of the towers, or think of the base camp. Something built and physically there will be much more tangible than a vision on paper or on the screen. And finally, I think it's really important to actively care and engage. And I think this is where I appeal, appeal to you, to become much more proactive, to become much more activist, to follow your passions and to really stand up for what you believe in. When you have people on the other side of the world, on the streets, throwing stones, because China is kind of basically taking over Hong Kong, they have a lot to lose. That's why they do it. Here in Central Europe, we're in a pretty safe place. Not much is happening. So we've become a bit complacent. I think we have this energy in us, and we have the potential to really change things if we really want to, no? But we feel like, oh no, I don't have to chase ECTS. It's not about the cause, it's about you getting your papers. And I think this is right, you have to do that too, don't forget. But I think we can do more. And it starts by caring about your spaces. We just went on an interesting study trip. Sorry, slight discourse, I should be ending here, but this is a nice story. And basically, we have students from 40 different countries at their institute, pretty much all continents except Antarctica. And I took them on a hiking trip, and we spent the night outside. This was October. It was freezing. It was really cold. And we had this outdoor coach with us. She's a 30-year-old lady who clearly knows how to engage with nature and how to hunt and how to do all that kind of stuff. And she basically taught us a very simple trick, which is so obvious. Even if you don't have much food and you're really hungry, if you put it really nicely and you prepare it nicely and you add a few M&Ms, it will make you so much more happy than just wolfing it down. And I think it's the same with spaces. It's about really caring about your space, no? And making it nice and make other people appreciate it. That contributes to the well-being overall. And finally, the last point. I think what's really important, of course, is to get like-minded people together. It's always about a group. Individually, it's very difficult. And I think architecture education needs to venture outside its comfort zone, outside its limitations, and I mean all limitations, including the walls, so that they can potentially develop into a school of thought. Thank you very much for your attention, for coming.